Welcome to House Talk on KAFM 88.1 Community Affairs. This is a monthly program that features local experts to discuss real estate topics of interest to home buyers and sellers in Mesa County. I'm your host. I'm Kate Porras. I'm a realtor at RE/MAX 4000. So when you're coming up on buying a home, one of the important things you have to think about is your homeowner's insurance. And joining me today is Jim Fink. He is the insurance broker and owner of Fink Insurance Agency here in Grand Junction. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I appreciate it. It's always great to have a good excuse to get out of the office. So.
It's a good excuse because we have some important things to talk about. Insurance issues. I've had conversations with several people just in the last couple of weeks who have brought up insurance and prices and how things happening in the world are affecting that. And so I thought it'd be a good conversation. Let's start with, though, the fact that you're an insurance broker, which is a little bit different than an insurance agent. For people that don't understand the difference, explain that a little bit.
So I think the biggest difference is a captive agent is an agent that sells strictly just one company. And then an independent agent like myself has multiple companies. So they can have contracts with multiple carriers. So we have about 40 different companies versus one.
So you're not representing one specific company. You have a whole array that people can shop around.
That's right.
So most people know that if they have a home or they own a car, things like that, they have insurance so that if something bad happens, you have an insurance company there that you've been paying money to that will help cover some of the costs. Kind of explain, though, the details of what happens in the insurance process.
So basically the insurance essentially is this. You think of it as two buckets. One bucket, all the premiums go in the bucket. Those premiums are invested, so that money goes in that bucket as well. And then there's bucket number two, which is the claims bucket, which is what pays out. Obviously, at the end of the year, if there's more money in the premium bucket with the investments, then they made money. If there's not, then they lost money, which unfortunately was the case in 2022, where all companies across the board lost money, with the exception of one company that made about 0.5 cent for every dollar they put in.
That's pretty dramatic when you think about it.
First time ever that we've seen that. As an example, USAA in 100 years has never lost money until last year was the first time.
So what were the causes for things like that?
Well, claims, catastrophic claims. You see the wildfires in California. Here in Colorado, we have the hailstorms. And those are, a few years ago, we paid out almost $3 billion in claims in one hailstorm in the Denver area. So when those things happen, it causes the companies to dramatically change their course from a profitability standpoint. Now, the other thing, too, is there's a third bucket. It's called reinsurance. And every percentage of money that comes into that premium bucket, a small amount goes into the reinsurance bucket. So these catastrophic losses that we see, these billion-dollar losses, the reinsurance bucket actually will pay out some of those. So it keeps the company solvent so they can continue to do business as usual and pay out claims as they should.
Yeah, we have been having some interesting weather phenomenon across the country, even here in Colorado. I have a friend who lives in Highlands Ranch, and she texts me, a tornado just went through my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So things have been happening. We have, was it Vermont right now that's having the flooding? So these natural disasters are happening all over. Is it something that is of a concern for insurance companies?
Yeah, absolutely. Things are definitely getting worse. I think in general, worldwide, we're seeing many more catastrophic things happening. The hurricanes and the fires and the floods and these hailstorms that are coming through. Colorado's not the only state that has that, obviously, and so there's other states that deal with that. But unfortunately, California, Louisiana, Florida, and Colorado are the top states right now that are suffering from these catastrophic losses, and consequently, the rates are about the highest in the country as well.
You're listening to House Talk on KAFM Grand Junction. In the studio today is Jim Fink, insurance broker with the Fink Insurance Agency. Some of those states that you mentioned, including Colorado, we're seeing some changes with what insurance companies are doing, and some are even pulling out, is my understanding. What does that mean?
Well, so insurance companies are regulated by the state, not the federal government, but state to state. There's an insurance commissioner with each state as well. So there is oversight. So companies can't just charge whatever they want. It's not like the Wild West out here. If they have an increase that they put through, it has to be approved through the insurance commissioner of each state. If they try to increase policies too much, the insurance commissioner will just flat decline it, say, I'm sorry. And if a company says, hey, we're suffering all these losses, whether it be in California with the fires or Colorado with the hailstorms, they might say, okay, we have to increase this amount, maybe 20% or 30% of all the policies across the board in order to continue to be profitable. You got to keep in mind, these are businesses. They have stockholders and shareholders and in some cases policyholders, depending on the type of insurance company they are. And if they can't raise rates enough to compensate for the losses they have because they are regulated, sometimes they have to up and just leave the state altogether, which has been the case.
And that's up to the company to choose to leave the state. It's
Right.
not the commissioner saying you've got to go.
Yeah, usually it's the company themselves from a profitability standpoint. I mean, the cost of building homes has gone up considerably. The materials have been difficult to get. So that plays a factor in some of those things as well.
Are there specific areas of Colorado that are more difficult to get insurance in compared to others?
Well, the prices in Denver and on the eastern slope essentially are pretty much between, I'd say, 3 to 4 times what they are on the western slope because of the hailstorms primarily and some of the fires. We haven't suffered that. However, there are areas out on the western slope, the rural areas, where there aren't fire stations and there's no, hydrants and things like that are close to the properties. The fire line scores are becoming an issue, and they're cracking down on it. They're becoming very strict at the carriers right now. And consequently, we're getting declines in non-renewals because of that fire line score being in those rural areas.
Explain that a little bit. What does that mean, non-renewals?
So non-renewal company could come in and maybe they've had you for 3 or 4 years, and this is happening right now. They're changing their guidelines and their underwriting guidelines, and they're saying, okay, there's a metric, and I can't explain the metric because it's different for all the companies. But if they're too far away from a fire station or too far away from a hydrant or a water source, they will actually non-renew those policies because that fire line score has a number. It could be between 1 and 10. And the closer you get to whatever that threshold is, the more likely you'll be non-renewed or canceled altogether.
So this is something that comes into play when I'm doing a contract for someone who's wanting to buy a property, for example, because we have a deadline in there for the buyer to research their insurance, check with their insurance company to make sure not only will they insure the property, but also at a rate that the person is comfortable with. And I find that sometimes buyers are like, oh yeah, I've been with this guy forever. He's great. No problem. I don't need to worry about it. But what we're seeing in some of these changes, even here in Western Colorado, people really need to be on top of that to make sure that they're going to not only get insurance on the property that they want to buy, but also at a rate that they're comfortable paying.
Right. Yeah. Because it does become exorbitant in some cases, and especially, like I said, in the rural areas, up on the Mesa and Glade Park, places like that, we've seen increases of 100 to 200% on these premiums. And in some cases, the companies are flat declining applications, which we'd never seen in the past, where they just flat out say, no, we don't want that business.
That's interesting. So when we have these natural disasters happening on the Front Range, for example, is that affecting the customers here in Grand Junction, where, for the most part, knock on wood, we don't see a ton of natural disasters here in the populated areas of Mesa County?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, insurance companies are governed by the state as a whole. So most companies, at least all currently, if they have insurance policies in Denver versus insurance policies in Junction, they love insurance policies on the western slope. But the damages and the claims that they pay out affect the state as a whole, which affects the company as a whole within that state. So it definitely affects us over here when those big claims happen over on the eastern slope.
So is it safe to say that sometimes we pay for disasters that happen over there?
Sure. Yeah. And in some cases with some companies, you could pay for disasters that happen in Florida or California. So it just depends on the company you're with.
You're listening to House Talk on KAFM Grand Junction. In the studio with today is Jim Fink, insurance broker with Fink Insurance Agency. So a lot of people, I think, sometimes then think, oh, those insurance companies are the bad guys in this situation. Is that an accurate representation, an accurate way to think about it?
Well, I think that, like we said before, the important thing to remember is insurance companies are a business, and businesses are in business to make money, and they have to make business decisions. And sometimes when you get a non-renewal and you get upset and you think, I paid this company for 20 years, now I have a claim, they paid it out, but now they're canceling me. Again, it's a business decision from a profitability standpoint. So they definitely could be looked at as the bad guys sometimes. Maybe when they don't pay claims that you think should be paid, that could possibly be another reason to be upset with them or frustrated with these companies. But keep in mind that there are processes in place to be able to go back to these companies and have them relook at these things. And in many cases, they overturn those. So don't give up the first time. Make sure that if you really think that you have a claim that needs to be paid, don't let them be the bad guys. Go to them and say, talk to a supervisor. Even the state has, since they're regulated by the state has a process in place for looking at these deals as well to overturn them. And they do regularly.
It may also be to a person's advantage to shop around a little bit, it sounds like.
Yeah. Right now, unfortunately, like I said, if you're a captive agent, you have one company, then your guidelines are very strict. So that's it. So definitely you want to look at other companies. Again, that's why the insurance brokers are a good option, because they have multiple companies that have, the underwriting guidelines change based on how they did the year before or 2 years before. Maybe they had a great year last year and this year they're loosening up a little bit or vice versa. But you have to shop around to find out who that is.
How often do you recommend that people reevaluate their insurance situation and shop around and maybe look for someone else? How often should they do that?
I think they should do it every year.
Okay.
I mean, if it's 12-month policy, you should do it every 12 months. If you have a broker, they have other options available. Make sure that they're giving you the best option. And hopefully they're a little proactive in that and calling you ahead of time and saying, hey, just so you know, I'm looking at your stuff to make sure you still have the best deal.
There are also individual circumstances. We talk about these natural disasters that can happen, but individual circumstances can affect you as well if you're making a number of claims on your own policy and things like that, correct?
Absolutely.
Talk to me about what does that look like?
Well, the biggest thing is education in this, because I've seen claims where you have a $1,000 deductible on your house, you have a $1,500 claim, and you file that claim for $500. The thing you got to realize is that on any preferred or standard company, if you have 2 home claims within a 3-year period, they're going to cancel your policy, period, no questions asked. And there's no way you can get back on that policy until you get outside that 3-year period. So don't waste that for a $500, out-of-pocket type claim when there's plenty of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 out there that you want to make sure that you have that liability in place when that happens.
A lot of good information and a lot of things to really consider as a homeowner when you're looking at not only buying a new property, but then evaluating what you already have, something that you might want to get with your insurance person and talk about and have some good questions for them. Yeah,
get educated. That's the most important thing in the insurance industry, especially right now with the landscape is much different than even 12 months ago. So just like real estate, you got to be educated in what's going on or you could be left behind a little bit.
And things change, so you got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This segment airs on the second Wednesday of each month. You can also get podcasts on demand at KAFMCommunityRadio.org. Jim, if people have more questions and they want to get some more information, how can they contact you?
So you can call us directly here in town. It's 241-2422. You can look us up on the web, Fink Insurance Agency. And, from an educational standpoint, we can certainly answer any questions you may have. So.
Great information. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And if you have more questions that I can answer for you, feel free to reach out to me. You can visit my website, kateporras.com. Thanks so much.